There are two kinds of mornings in this house. The kind where everything is peaceful, quiet, and exactly where it belongs, and the kind where a tiny orange kitten walks through the front door. This was the second kind. Before we get to the chaos, and trust me, there is a lot of chaos, you need to understand something important about the cat who already lived here. His name is Borsuk, and Borsuk is a Pallas cat. If you've never seen a Pallas cat before, picture the world's most dramatic, permanently offended, deeply suspicious little creature, wrapped in the fluffiest fur coat nature ever produced. Pallas cats are wild by origin, stocky and low to the ground, with flat faces that seem permanently locked into one expression. That expression is, "I cannot believe what I am witnessing right now." Borsuk had lived in this house for 3 years. He knew every corner of it, every sunbeam, every good napping spot, every squeaky floorboard that gave away a human approaching with a camera. He had a routine, he had standards, he had a favorite toy, a small crinkly ball that lived under the radiator and belonged to absolutely nobody else. He was, in his own mind, the undisputed ruler of this entire kingdom. Then the carrier arrived. Borsuk heard it before he saw it, a small rustling sound, a tiny uncertain meow, not even a full meow, more like a question mark with fur. He emerged from the hallway slowly, the way only a Pallas cat can, low to the ground, eyes narrowed, tail moving in that careful, deliberate way that meant he was gathering information. He peered around the corner of the doorframe, and there it was, small, orange, completely unaware of him. The kitten was maybe 8 weeks old, tiny enough to fit inside one of Borsuk's massive paws. It stood in the middle of the living room floor, blinking at its new surroundings with the pure, uncomplicated confidence of something that has never once been told it should be afraid. Borsuk stared. The kitten did not stare back. The kitten was looking at a dust particle floating near the window. Now, here is the moment that the camera caught, and the moment that honestly explains everything you need to know about this entire relationship. Borsuk disappeared behind the corner. He came back holding his toy frying pan. It's a small crinkly cat toy, shaped like a frying pan. He had carried it across the room in his mouth with the focused energy of someone who has made a decision and committed to it fully. He positioned himself behind the corner of the couch. He waited. He peered around the edge, one eye visible, toy gripped firmly. The kitten sneezed. It was the smallest, most innocent sneeze, a tiny pioft of a sneeze, the kind of sneeze that should not alarm anyone or anything. Borsuk launched 4 inches into the air sideways, dropped the frying pan, and retreated fully behind the couch. The kitten sneezed again, shook its tiny head, and went back to watching the dust particle. This is how it began, not with a dramatic standoff, not with hissing or territorial displays, but with a Pallas cat startled by a sneeze, collecting himself behind the furniture, and pretending the entire thing never happened. Over the next hour, Borsuk attempted 4 separate approaches. Each one failed in a different, increasingly creative way. The second attempt ended when the kitten simply walked directly toward him, not aggressively, not cautiously, just directly, the way small kittens walk toward everything, because they have not yet learned that some things require hesitation. Borsuk backed up 3 full steps and bumped into the wall. The third attempt ended when Borsuk got distracted by the kitten's tail and forgot he was supposed to be intimidating. The fourth attempt, and this is the one that really established the dynamic, ended when the kitten yawned directly in Borsuk's face, curled up 2 inches away from him, and went to sleep. Borsuk sat very still for a long moment. Then he sat down and began grooming his own face with enormous dignity. The caretaker watched all of this from the kitchen doorway, phone in hand, recording. She had been a little nervous about the introduction. Pallas cats are not domesticated in the way that house cats are. They are careful, private animals. They do not warm to change quickly. She had read about slow introductions, about scent swapping, about keeping the animals in separate rooms for the first week. Borsuk had not read any of that. He was already following the kitten from a distance of approximately 3 feet, watching its every move with an expression that was trying very hard to say, "I am absolutely not interested in this creature," while his feet said something completely different. The kitten had no idea it was being followed. It found a bottle cap under the edge of the couch, batted it across the floor, and chased it into the hallway. Borsuk watched it go. Then, slowly, quietly, with great reluctance, he followed. Nobody warned this kitten what he had just walked into. And nobody warned Borsuk what was about to happen to his perfectly ordered life. But somewhere in that hallway, with a bottle cap skidding across hardwood floors and two sets of small paws thundering after it. Something was already beginning. Something that would take a few weeks to name, but would eventually look a lot like friendship. First, though, the kitten was about to find the frying pan, and that changed everything. The frying pan disappeared on a Tuesday. Borsig noticed at 7:43 in the morning, approximately 4 minutes after the kitten had been awake. He knew it was gone because he checked under the radiator first thing every morning, a ritual as reliable as sunrise. Paw in, paw out, crinkly sound confirmed, day could begin. This morning, nothing. He checked twice, then he checked the spot next to the radiator, then the spot behind the radiator. Then he sat in front of the radiator and stared at it for a full 30 seconds, as though the toy might reappear if he waited long enough. From the other room came a small, enthusiastic crinkling sound. Borsig turned his head very slowly. The kitten had the frying pan. He was not doing anything sophisticated with it. He was simply batting it back and forth between his two front paws, with the pure, uncomplicated joy of a creature who has found something crinkly and considers this the greatest morning of his short life. Borsig walked to the doorway. He stood there. The kitten looked up, saw him, and batted the frying pan directly toward him, apparently as an invitation. Borsig looked at the toy, looked at the kitten, looked back at the toy. Then he walked away with enormous dignity and began grooming himself beside the window. The caretaker, watching from the hallway, covered her mouth so the sound of laughing wouldn't disturb the moment. The Great House War had officially begun. The cardboard box arrived that same afternoon. It was a medium-sized shipping box, the kind that holds maybe 2 bags of cat food, and the caretaker had barely set it on the floor before both cats appeared from opposite ends of the room, with the synchronized focus of 2 animals who had just agreed on the same exact goal, without speaking a word. They reached the box at the same time. They both tried to get inside. Neither fit comfortably. Borsig was too wide and too fluffy. A Pallas cat is built for crouching in cold grassland, not for folding himself into a standard shipping box. The kitten was small enough to technically fit, but Borsig's presence at the entrance made the geometry impossible. For a moment they simply stared at each other from opposite sides of the box opening. Then Borsig placed one paw inside. The kitten placed one paw inside. Borsig placed his chin on the edge. The kitten sat down directly in front of the opening and refused to move. They stayed like that for 4 minutes. The caretaker timed it. Neither blinked particularly often. Neither gave any indication of backing down. Eventually Borsig sat up straight, looked at the wall to his left as though something very interesting had appeared there, and walked away. He came back 11 minutes later when the kitten had fallen asleep inside the box. He sat beside it for a long moment, then chose the exact spot directly on top of the box, close enough to claim involvement, but too dignified to admit defeat. The box remained contested territory for the rest of the week. The food bowl situation developed quietly. Borsig had always eaten with focused, serious energy. He approached his bowl the same way every time, deliberate, unhurried, fully committed. He did not like to be observed while eating. He did not like movement near his peripheral vision. He had a whole system. The kitten had no system. The kitten approached everything at approximately 40 miles per hour and figured out the details upon arrival. On the third morning, while Borsig stood at his bowl working through breakfast with characteristic concentration, the kitten appeared from around the corner of the kitchen island, located the other food bowl against the far wall, and began eating from the opposite side. Borsig did not notice. He ate. The kitten ate. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft sound of 2 cats eating. Then something, a sound, a movement, some small shift in the air, made Borsig look up. He saw the kitten. The kitten looked up at exactly the same moment. They made direct eye contact across the kitchen floor. A full 4 seconds passed. Then both cats looked back down and continued eating, with the careful mutual agreement of 2 individuals who have decided that acknowledging the situation would make it more complicated. The caretaker stood in the doorway with her coffee going cold and said nothing. The hallway chase happened on a Friday. Nobody is entirely sure what started it. The footage begins mid-chase. Borsig already at full speed, which for a Pallas cat means a low, surprisingly fast gallop that looks like a very fluffy boulder rolling urgently from room to room. The kitten was ahead of him, orange tail straight up, moving with the reckless speed of something that has not yet learned to calculate the stopping distance on hardwood floors. They hit the long stretch of the main hallway together. The kitten went sideways first, back legs losing traction, sliding several feet into the baseboard with a soft thump, and immediately springing upright as though nothing had happened. Borsig attempted to slow down, which on wooden floors is more of a theoretical concept than a practical one. He skidded the last 4 feet with all 4 legs slightly splayed, came to a stop against the laundry basket beside the bathroom door, and knocked it sideways. Clean laundry distributed itself gently across the hallway floor. Both cats sat among the scattered laundry and breathed. Then the kitten spotted a sock. The chase reversed direction. The mirror incident was different. The caretaker had moved a full-length mirror to lean against the bedroom wall, and neither cat had encountered it at the right angle until a quiet Sunday afternoon. They came around the corner together, side by side, which was itself becoming more common without either of them openly acknowledging it, and stopped. 2 cats looked back at them from the mirror. Borsig's tail went to full bottle brush, his ears flattened. He made the low, quiet sound that Pallas cats make when they are experiencing something they cannot immediately classify. The kitten's back arched, all the fur along his spine lifting in a single motion. For 1 full second they were both completely still, facing their own reflections with absolute seriousness. Then both cats jumped backward at precisely the same moment, collided with each other, and sprinted in opposite directions down the hallway. The mirror sat quietly against the wall, reflecting an empty room. From somewhere in the house came the sound of the laundry basket going over again. By the end of the 2nd week, a pattern had become visible, not a truce exactly, not friendship yet, but something. They had begun eating at the same time, not from the same bowl, Borsig had standards, but simultaneously, in the same kitchen, without either one pretending the other wasn't there. The kitten had started sitting in the spots Borsig had recently vacated, as though the warmth were a kind of information worth collecting. Borsig had started, very occasionally, choosing spots closer to wherever the kitten happened to be napping. Neither acknowledged this. The caretaker noticed. She had also noticed something else, something small, easy to miss unless you were watching closely. The expensive cat toys she had arranged across the living room floor sat untouched, exactly where she had placed them. But the bottle cap from the kitchen had been batted into the hallway, then back into the living room, then under the couch, then out again. It was currently resting near the radiator, beside the crinkly frying pan, which had quietly returned to its original location sometime in the last 2 days. Neither cat explained this. Bedtime came the way it always did. Lights dimming, the house going quiet, the caretaker settling in for the night. Borsig had his spot. He had always had his spot. It was a particular corner of the couch, near the left armrest, where the cushion had compressed slightly over 3 years into exactly the right shape. She turned off the lamp. In the dark, the house was still. And then, slowly, quietly, with the careful deliberateness of a very small creature trying very hard not to be noticed, a tiny orange shape crossed the room. She didn't move. She waited. Nobody expected what happened next. The couch cushion had always belonged to Borsig. This was not a rule anyone had written down. It didn't need to be. 3 years of consistent occupation had made it as official as anything in this house. The slight depression in the left corner cushion, the particular angle of the armrest, the specific warmth that built up over an evening, all of it was his, in the quiet, absolute way that cats claim things. So when the caretaker turned the lamp back on, very slowly, very carefully, and saw the orange kitten curled against Borsig's side like a comma pressed against a period, she genuinely did not breathe for a moment. Borsig was awake. She could tell by the angle of his ears, slightly forward, tracking her movement across the room. He knew she was there. He knew she was watching. He knew exactly what was happening beside him. He did not move. His expression in the low light said several things simultaneously. It said, "I am tolerating this under protest." It said, "This means nothing." It said, "If you tell anyone, I will deny everything." The kitten slept the deep, boneless sleep of something that had decided, without any particular anxiety, that this was now a safe place. Borsig stared at the caretaker. The caretaker stared at Borsig. Then she turned the lamp back off, went to bed, and lay in the dark smiling at the ceiling for a while. Morning came the way it always did, light through the curtains, the small sounds of the house waking up, the caretaker moving toward the kitchen. She paused at the couch. Borsig was grooming himself with the focused energy of someone demonstrating that they had absolutely been awake for hours and had not been sleeping curled around a small orange kitten at all. The kitten was already in the kitchen, sitting beside the food bowl, fully committed to the new day. Nothing was said about the night before, nothing needed to be. The grooming started 3 days later. It began as most things between these two did, accidentally. They were side by side on the warm patch of floor near the back window, a spot that caught the afternoon sun at just the right angle, and which both of them had independently discovered and were now occupying with careful, studied indifference to each other's presence. Borsig was grooming his own face, methodical, thorough, the way Pallas cats do everything. The kitten watched him for a moment. Then the kitten leaned over and licked the top of Borsig's head. Borsig stopped mid-motion. He sat very still with one paw raised. The kitten licked his head again, with the cheerful confidence of someone doing someone else a favor. Something in Borsig's posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, but there. The raised paw came down slowly. His ears relaxed a single degree. He turned and began grooming the kitten's forehead in return. For about 45 seconds, the sunny patch of floor held the most peaceful scene the house had produced in 3 weeks. 2 cats, side by side, the small sounds of grooming, the dust moving slowly through the light. Then Borsig bit the kitten's ear. Not hard, not aggressively, but definitively, the way an older sibling ends a hug that has gone on slightly too long. The kitten's eyes went wide, then they went narrow. They were off the floor and wrestling across the living room in under 2 seconds. The peaceful moment dissolved entirely, the sunny patch empty, a small plant on the windowsill trembling slightly from the vibration of 2 cats hitting the couch at speed. The caretaker looked up from her book, looked back down, turned the page. The robotic vacuum had lived in the corner of the kitchen for 2 months without incident. Borsig had assessed it on day 1, circled it twice, determined it was not a threat while stationary, and filed it away as irrelevant. The kitten had arrived after the vacuum's last run and had no existing opinion about it. On a Wednesday afternoon, the caretaker pressed the button and walked away. The vacuum hummed to life. Both cats heard it from opposite ends of the house. They arrived in the kitchen doorway at the same time. The vacuum moved slowly across the kitchen floor, bumping gently off the cabinet base, redirecting, continuing. It was doing exactly what it always did. It was not particularly alarming. Borsig and the kitten watched it from the doorway with identical expressions, the specific, focused attention of 2 creatures deciding whether something constitutes a threat. The vacuum turned in their direction. They both puffed up at exactly the same moment. Borsig going full Pallas cat spectacular, his already impressive fur expanding outward until he looked roughly twice his actual size. The kitten, with considerably less fur to work with, achieved a respectable arch. They held their ground for approximately 4 seconds. The vacuum bumped into the base of the refrigerator and turned away. Then it turned back. They ran. Not in opposite directions. Together, side by side down the hallway, skidding around the corner into the living room, launching simultaneously onto the couch, where they sat pressed against each other on the back cushions, watching the kitchen doorway with wide, serious eyes. The vacuum hummed peacefully in the distance. Neither cat moved for several minutes. When it finally powered down and went quiet, Borsig stepped down from the couch with great dignity and walked back to the kitchen to investigate. The kitten followed 2 steps behind. The vacuum sat in its corner, small and silent. Borsig approached it, sniffed it once, looked back at the kitten. The kitten approached it, sniffed it, looked back at Borsig. They had faced the enemy together. They had assessed the situation. They had made the strategic decision to retreat and then return when conditions were favorable. Nobody needed to say anything about the running. The treat heist took planning. Or at least, it took the particular kind of accidental coordination that looks like planning when you watch it back on video. The treats lived in a ceramic jar on the kitchen counter. The caretaker was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, the treat jar within arm's reach, a cup of tea going slightly cold beside her. The kitten appeared in the kitchen doorway. He sat down in the center of the doorway and began meowing, not urgently, not dramatically, just consistently, the patient, reliable meow of a cat making a reasonable point about treat distribution. The caretaker looked up, said "You just ate," and looked back at her screen. The kitten continued. She reached for her tea. Her eyes moved to the window for a moment, tracking a sound from outside. That was when Borsig, who had been completely silent and invisible for the last 20 minutes, appeared on the counter beside the treat jar. She turned back from the window. Borsig was sitting beside the treat jar with the expression of someone who had been there the whole time and had no particular agenda. She looked at him, looked at the kitten who had gone quiet, looked back at Borsig. "No," she said. Borsuk looked at the treat jar, looked at her, looked at the treat jar again. She gave them each one treat, which was probably not the intended lesson, but was the practical outcome of negotiating with two cats who had, without any formal discussion, developed a working system. The closet incident happened on a Thursday. The caretaker had been putting away laundry, the same laundry that had been distributed across the hallway floor twice in the past 2 weeks, and had stepped away for a moment to answer her phone. The closet door, not fully latched, drifted open approximately 4 inches. 4 inches is enough for a curious kitten. 4 inches is, it turns out, also enough for a Pallas cat, who has decided that wherever the kitten is going is probably worth monitoring. She was on the phone for 6 minutes. When she came back to the bedroom, the closet door was fully closed, the latch engaged from the shifting weight of the door swinging on its hinges. The bedroom was quiet. She put the laundry away, went to the kitchen, made more tea. It was a full 12 minutes before she noticed the absence, the particular, specific quiet of a house that is missing the small ambient sounds of 2 cats existing somewhere within it. She stood still. From behind the closet door came a sound, a small meow, then a pause. Then another small meow, slightly different pitch, slightly different personality. 2 voices, 1 closet. She opened the door. They came out with the energy of 2 individuals who had been conducting an entirely normal and planned activity, and were now simply choosing to relocate. Borsuk walked to the kitchen with complete composure. The kitten stopped, looked back at the closet once, then followed. The caretaker stood in the bedroom doorway for a moment, looking at the closet, looking at the hallway where they had disappeared, thinking about how much had changed in 3 weeks without anyone making any particular announcement about it. She said it quietly, to no one in particular, while the house settled into the sounds of early evening. 2 cats somewhere in the living room, the familiar soft bumping of a crinkly toy, the occasional scuffle and recovery. Sometimes the best friendships start with the funniest misunderstandings. She meant it. She had watched them move from strangers to rivals, to reluctant companions to, whatever this was now, this thing that looked like chasing and wrestling and food bowl negotiations and mirror panics and closet accidents. This thing that looked, at the end of every day, like 2 cats choosing the same room. She didn't know it yet, but the funniest moment of the entire year was still waiting. It was about 24 hours away, and it was going to require a cardboard box. It started, as most great things do, with a Monday. There is nothing particularly special about Mondays in this house. The light comes through the same windows at the same angles, the food bowls get filled at the same time, the radiator ticks in the same rhythm it always has. But something was different this Monday. The caretaker felt it before she could name it, a particular energy in the air, the kind that arrives in houses with animals the way weather arrives before it arrives, a pressure, a readiness. She made her coffee. She looked at Borsuk, who was sitting on the back of the couch with the focused, distant expression of someone reviewing a plan. She looked at the kitten, who was already moving, not toward anything specific, just moving, the way he sometimes did in the mornings when something inside him had decided that today required more speed than usual. She picked up her phone. She pressed record. This turned out to be the best decision she made all year. It began with the jump. The kitten had been eyeing the top of the bookshelf for several days. It was not an unreasonable ambition. The shelf was perhaps 4 feet high, well within the theoretical range of a healthy young cat who had been practicing his vertical takeoffs on the couch for 2 weeks. The theory and the practice did not fully align. He approached from across the room at considerable speed, launched with genuine commitment, made it approximately 3/4 of the way to the shelf, connected briefly with the edge, and then descended in a slow, sideways arc that deposited him neatly back on the floor amid a small avalanche of paperback books. He sat up straight immediately. He looked around the room with the expression of someone checking whether they had been observed. Borsuk, from the couch, had observed everything. His expression did not change, but his tail moved once, a single slow movement that contained, somehow, an entire opinion. The kitten began grooming his own face with great focus. The books stayed on the floor. The caretaker left them there. It felt important not to interfere. 15 minutes later, Borsuk attempted to jump from the arm of the couch to the windowsill. He had made this jump approximately 400 times over 3 years without incident. This time the kitten was sitting directly below the windowsill, looking up at something on the ceiling, tail moving in that slow, unpredictable way that made the landing zone unclear. Borsuk paused on the arm of the couch. He recalculated. He jumped anyway, because Pallas cats do not adjust their plans based on the positions of small orange kittens, and landed on the windowsill with his usual precision, but then turned to look down and found the kitten staring up at him with wide, interested eyes from directly below. Borsig stared back. The kitten made a small sound, not quite a meow, more of a questioning chirp. Borsig looked at the window, looked back down. Then, with the slow, reluctant movement of someone making a decision they have not entirely approved of, he stepped down from the windowsill and sat beside the kitten on the floor. The windowsill sat empty. The caretaker, watching, understood that she had just witnessed something that would have been completely invisible to anyone who hadn't spent 3 weeks paying close attention. The zoomies arrived at 2:17 in the afternoon. There is no warning for zoomies. There is no build-up, no visible trigger, no logical explanation that fully satisfies. One moment the kitten was sitting beside the water bowl, doing nothing in particular. The next moment he was running, not toward anything, not away from anything. Just running, full speed, back legs overtaking front legs around corners, the particular controlled chaos of a young cat burning energy that has simply accumulated past the point of containment. He went around the couch, through the kitchen, back through the living room, around the couch again. Borsig watched the first lap with the calm attention of a spectator. He watched the second lap with slightly more focused attention. On the third lap, something shifted. He was off the couch before the kitten had completed the turn at the kitchen doorway. Low and fast, the Pallas cat gallop, cutting across the living room at an angle that intercepted the kitten's trajectory near the armchair. They were running together now, around the couch, through the kitchen, back through the living room, the sounds of it filling the house, paws on hardwood, the soft thud of bodies rounding corners, the occasional collision with something soft enough to survive. The caretaker stood on the couch. This seemed safest. They scared themselves 3 separate times in the next hour. The first was a plastic bag near the recycling bin that moved in the draft from the heating vent. Both cats saw it simultaneously. Both cats departed simultaneously. The bag continued moving peacefully without any awareness of the panic it had caused. The second was a large moth that had somehow gotten inside, hovering near the ceiling light in the hallway. Both cats tracked it from the floor with professional focus. Then both cats flinched backward when it dropped suddenly. Then both cats looked at each other with expressions that were trying very hard to say, "I was not startled, I was simply repositioning." The third was Borsig. The kitten had gone around the corner of the bedroom doorway just ahead of Borsig, then stopped. Borsig came around the corner at speed and found the kitten directly in front of him, closer than expected, sitting still. Both cats startled, both cats puffed. Then they sat 6 inches apart and stared at each other while their fur settled back into its normal configuration, processing what had just happened, arriving independently at the conclusion that this information would not be shared with anyone. The toy basket got involved around 3 o'clock. The caretaker had bought good toys, thoughtful toys, a feather wand, a motorized butterfly, several mice with realistic texture, a crinkle tunnel with a bell inside. She had arranged them with genuine optimism across the living room floor at the beginning of the month. They remained exactly where she had placed them, largely untouched, the motorized butterfly still in its packaging. What was not untouched: 1 bottle cap, currently under the armchair, 1 twist tie from a bread bag, location unknown, 1 pen cap, disputed, 1 hair tie, missing since Tuesday, 1 small piece of packing paper from the original shipping box, now torn into 3 pieces and distributed across 2 rooms. The bottle cap emerged from under the armchair at 3:04. Nobody admitted to bringing it out. But within 6 minutes both cats were on the kitchen floor engaged in a bottle cap competition of such focused intensity that the caretaker stood in the doorway for a full 4 minutes watching, coffee in hand, the expensive feather wand visible on the living room floor behind her, completely ignored. The tail chasing happened spontaneously and briefly, and was never repeated, which somehow made it more significant. The kitten was sitting in the middle of the living room floor when he noticed his own tail, the way kittens do, with genuine surprise, as though the tail had arrived without warning. He went after it, turned faster, achieved a respectable spiral. Borsig watched this from the armchair with an expression of deep philosophical distance. Then, slowly, with the careful deliberateness of someone doing something for reasons that remained entirely private, Borsig looked at his own tail. He looked away. He looked back at it. He was still for a moment. Then he stepped down from the armchair, sat on the floor and looked at his tail again with renewed assessment. The caretaker held her breath. Borsig turned once, just once, a single dignified rotation. Then he walked to the water bowl and drank, with the composure of someone who had not just done what he had just done, and would not be discussing it. The kitten was still spinning. At 4:30, something shifted. The energy that had been running through the house all day began to change, the way late afternoon light changes, the way houses change when the busiest part of the day has passed, and something quieter begins to move in. The zoomies stopped. The bottle cap came to rest near the baseboard, and stayed there. The kitten found a patch of warm floor near the heating vent, and sat down slowly, the fast-moving creature of 3 hours ago folding himself into something smaller and stiller. Borsig came around the corner from the hallway and stopped when he saw him there. He stood for a moment in the way he sometimes did before making a decision that he would not be acknowledging as a decision. Then he crossed the room. He walked past the kitten by about a foot, turned around, walked back, and sat down. Close, not quite touching, the heating vent moved warm air across the floor. The afternoon light came through the window at its long, low angle, the kind that makes everything look like it is being remembered rather than currently happening. Both cats were still. The cardboard box appeared at 5 o'clock. The same medium-sized shipping box that had been contested territory since the beginning. The caretaker had kept it in the corner of the living room because both cats continued to show interest in it, and removing it felt like it might matter somehow. She didn't move it toward them. She didn't do anything. She was in the kitchen, not watching, when she heard the small sound of cardboard from the living room. She came to the doorway. The box had been moved, or had arrived at a new position, the physics of which were unclear. It was no longer in the corner. It was in the middle of the floor, slightly tilted. Inside it, pressed together in the particular way that two animals fit into a space designed for one, were Borsig and the orange kitten. Borsig's chin was resting on the kitten's back. The kitten's nose was tucked under Borsig's front leg. Both of them were asleep. The box was, objectively, too small for both of them. Borsig's considerable fluff was compressed in a way that would have looked in any other circumstance deeply undignified. The kitten's tail was draped over the edge at an angle that suggested no planning had been involved. None of it mattered. They had found the geometry that worked. She stood in the doorway for a long time. She thought about the first morning, 3 weeks ago. Borsig with his frying pan behind the couch, the kitten sneezing, the whole careful, ridiculous beginning of something that had looked, at the time, like it might not work at all. She thought about all the failed ambushes, the sliding hallways, the mirror panic, the closet, the treat negotiations, the grooming that ended in ear-biting, the vacuum they had fled from together without discussing it after. She thought about all the small moments that hadn't looked like anything from the outside but had been, quietly, the building blocks of something real. They started as strangers. They became rivals. They became, through chaos and bottle caps and cardboard, and shared panic and accidental closets and one frying pan, something that didn't have a more precise name than this: brothers. Not because anyone planned it, not because it was easy, but because they had been in the same house, living the same days, and something in both of them had found the other and decided, without any formal announcement, to stay. She pressed the like button on her own video later that night, then laughed at herself for it. She looked at the couch, where they had relocated after she'd moved too close to the box and disturbed the arrangement. They were side by side, Borsig in his corner, the kitten pressed against him. Borsig's eyes were open. He looked at her. She looked at him. She said quietly, "I know. You were here first." His eyes closed.